Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're doing well. And let's get into a new topic today. So what we're going to cover today is how people misuse blockers, or the number one mistakes really that people make when we're talking about using blockers to improve our decisions. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to get into a real hand here. This is just something that I set up really quickly because I thought it would be. I knew that it would work. So it's something that it's an example of how I think a lot of people would use their blockers incorrectly to reach a bad decision, and how we can use our blockers much more effectively to reach better decisions. So with that, let's jump straight into it. Here we have a hand, and the hand is it's a limped pot. Okay, so the small blind has just called here, and the big blind has checked back. Okay, and the flop is King 7 Deuce two tone. Okay, so King 7 Deuce two tone, and the small blind checks, which, as you can see, is a pretty reasonable play. There's a lot of checking. The green is check and the light pink is bet, if you've never seen something like this before. Small blind checks, big blind bets, reasonably often. In our example, the big blind is going to bet. And what we're going to pay close attention to is how the big blind is playing its nut flush draws in this example. So in this example, the big blind is betting about 60% of its ace-high flush draws, but of course there just aren't that many of them. So there aren't that many ace-high flush draws in this range, and you might say, why not? And I would answer that the big blind is going to isolate those ace-high hands pre-flop, and keep in mind that the big blind has checked back pre-flop in this example. So because the big blind checked back before the flop, and the big blind is going to isolate its best ace-high hands, the big blind just doesn't have that many ways of having an ace-high flush draw. So big blind has a couple of them here. They're mixing, basically, and that's fine, whatever. So the big blind bets, the small blind calls, and we move on to the turn, which happens to be the 8 of hearts. The small blind continues to check, which is a pretty good posture to take, and after having check called the flop. And the big blind, this is the big blind strategy. So we see here that the big blind is predominantly, but not exclusively, checking back its ace-high flush draws. And that's in part because, they beat bluffs. So if the big blind bets an ace-high flush draw, its opponent will basically not fold many pairs, which are hands that have pretty good equity against an ace-high flush draw, but will fold everything else, which are pretty much the hands that ace-high flush draws dominate. So the ace-high flush draws are predominantly checks. Of course, we want to have some ace-high flushes when we bet the turn, but mostly we don't have them. And the bet on the turn here is quite large. It's about 150% of pot. So we're just going to go with the most commonly chosen bet size here. We're going to bet 150%, which is a nice overbet. And we're going to evaluate what the small blind does. And this is the small blind strategy here. So small blind check calls here with ace 8 with the ace of diamonds, with ace 7, with the ace of diamonds. Keep in mind the board is King 7 Deuce 8. So we've got a pair of 7s here and a pair of 8s, and we check call with those. We've got some ace king here, we check call with those. These are obviously ace high flush draws. We get to the river. The river is the 3 of diamonds, okay? And the small blind just continues to check. Don't worry about this small lead here. Just don't worry about it. So the small blind continues to check. And the big blind has 2 options now, okay? And the big blind's 2 options here are jamming. The big blind could just jam all in for 2x pot. Or the big blind could bet about 85%. These other options really the model doesn't like. Okay, so we've got 2 options that are chosen reasonably often, and we can see the behavior of these flushes here. If I just show you guys here, this is how the flushes are behaving. Okay, so this is the flushes behavior. For the most part, the flushes are jamming, and you can see that there are some king high flushes that don't jam. And there are no ace-high flushes in this range. Okay. Now, the reason that I'm showing you guys this is because when the big blind bets like this, so not all in, okay, and the small blind is evaluating check raising, most students will check raise the ace of diamonds in situations like this. Happens all the time. And this is actually this is one of the most commonly misplayed scenarios for people with respect to their blocker. So we'll go ahead and take a look at this. So the big blind bets 85%, and we can just evaluate what the small blind is doing with the ace of diamonds. You can see that the small blind is not jamming the ace of diamonds any more often. Actually, in fact, it's jamming the ace of diamonds less often than it's jamming the ace of spades or the ace of hearts, as long as those are paired with the 8 of diamonds. And the reason for that is because your opponent doesn't have ace-high flushes. Okay, so the mistake that I'm trying to diagnose for you guys here, and this is now the answer to the kind of thing that we're looking at, is that people jam blocking the nuts. People overuse nut blockers all the time. So in this situation, the nuts is an ace-high flush. The board's not paired, and the first nuts is an ace-high flush. And a lot of players here will jam with the ace of diamonds as a bluff. They'll get here, they'll have like ace-7 or ace-8. They'll face a relatively large bet, 85% here from their opponent, and they won't really want to call that bet, right? They won't really want to call that bet, and as a result, and you can see here that like when I say they won't really want to call that bet, you can understand why they wouldn't really want to call that bet, because when you look over here, in this like part that's been expanded, it's mixing to fold. Okay, so there's a blue component to this where it's showing you that this hand is folding sometimes, and you can just take my word for it. It's folding the ace of diamonds about 11% of the time here. So, given that it's folding the ace of diamonds about 11% of the time here, that's why people don't really want to call, is because their hand is worth 0. So the reason that when players get here and they face a big bet on the river, they have ace-8 or they have ace-7, and they don't really feel much like calling. These hands aren't great hands in this situation, right? They're not great hands. So they're correct to feel like they don't want to call. And they might just jam here with the ace of diamonds. But the reason that that's a misplay is because your opponent doesn't have any ace-high flushes. So you're not actually removing the hands that he's going to call your shove with, okay? So when we shove, we don't want to just shove with a nut blocker. That's my point. My point is we don't want to shove just blocking the nuts. We want to shove blocking the hands our opponent is going to call our bet with the most often. The hands that show up the most often, that our opponent's going to snap us off with, those are the hands we want to block. In this case, blocking the nuts is completely irrelevant because your opponent can't have the ace of diamonds. So blocking the ace of diamonds doesn't help you. Rather, blocking the king of diamonds is actually quite helpful. So even though it's a top pair hand, you can see that king 4, king of diamonds, well, you can't actually see the suits here, but you can take my word for it. King 4, king of diamonds is a very high frequency jam in this situation, okay? And actually we can, no, we'll just keep going. Yeah, king 4, king of diamonds is a very high frequency jam here. King 5, again, king of diamonds is a very high frequency jam here. We see Jack 8 with the 8 of diamonds here is a pretty high frequency jam. This is Jack 8 with the 8 of diamonds. Again, you guys can't see the combos, but I can. You guys are just looking at my ugly face. Queen 8, I can see the combos, so I know, trust me, the answers are right. Queen 8, 8 of diamonds is a pretty high frequency jam here. Okay, so this is just one illustration of how people tend to misuse blockers. People tend to really overdo blocking the nuts. Blocking the nuts is really important, but it's only relevant if your opponent can actually have the nuts. So hopefully this is helpful in terms of understanding how blocking effects work. What you're trying to do is you're trying to reduce the probability that you get called if you jam. So we can actually go ahead and take a look at the calling range if we shove. And you can see that on this top right bar here, there are no ace-high flushes that are going to call us. And there are no ace of diamonds combos that are going to call us. What we're going to get called by is king 8, king 7, right? King 7, 7, 8. In particular, 7, 8 with the 8 of diamonds is actually what's going to be the hand that calls us. 8 deuce, in particular, 8 deuce with the 8 of diamonds is going to be the hand that calls us. So pocket deuces, okay, so a set here. So, you know, king high flushes are obviously going to snap us off, and king high flushes are the strongest hands. So hopefully this helps, right? Using the nut blocker here, the ace of diamonds, would be an absolute disaster if you were to check shove the river with that hand, because it just doesn't help you at all. You might as well just shove with, like, I don't know, like, you know, clubs. You might as well shove with hearts. You might as well you're just shoving ace 8. You know, if you shove ace 8 with the ace of diamonds and you think you're doing something smart, you're really just shoving ace 8, because ace of diamonds is totally irrelevant. So this is really, truly one of the most common ways that my students misuse blockers, and I try to help them to work through that and improve. And hopefully this helps you guys. And thanks very much for taking the time, and I'll see you guys in the next video.